Welcome to episode number 295 of Goulet Q&A, where fountain pens are still a thing. I am Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and I've survived the last week. Things got a little crazy, but here I am. I'll give you an update on all that. But in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the girthiness of fountain pens, and if that's really necessary, why we see a bunch of pen options available overseas, but not domestically. Come on, what's up with that? We want them too. If I was the Fountain Pen Czar, what things would I decree? What pens that we offer with triangular grips, especially higher-end pens? If the LAMY 2000 nib, if I would consider that a pseudo-architect nib? There's been a lot of interest in architect nibs. Got to be honest with you. I talk about them on a pretty regular basis, but recently it seems like there's some renewed interest, so that's kind of fun. I'm going to give some updates on the drama in our building and local city because it's been a little cray-cray. And the world record for the longest running journal. That'll be my fun fact today. So should be a fun one. I'll start off with feedback. All right, got a lot of great feedback. I just got a couple of them to share with you today. This one is from Kenny Larson, says, thank you for releasing this, being the Q&A. Is there any way that you could release this so that I can listen to it on one of my podcast apps? Love the content, but I usually listen to you when I'm doing yard work, commuting, etc. Yes, there is a way to do that. It's something I'm thinking about. It's more work. And honestly, like kind of when I started out doing this again, picking it up again a few months ago, I wanted to see like, would it work? Do y'all still like it? Can I still do it? Signs are good that I'm going to continue to do it. So I'm taking this feedback more to heart. I would love to know because even like in past, I mean, we've done, I don't know, 2 or 3 different podcasts with the different format of videos that we've done over the years. And, you know, there's a significantly less interest in audio format because we work in a visual medium here with pens and ink. So I know it's not going to be as many people that want the audio, but if that's something of value, I will give it some serious thought. But it's not no work. So if it's something of a lot of value to many of you, I know I have YouTube Premium, so I can download stuff and just listen to it in the audio in the background. Maybe that's an option too, but obviously that's like another subscription thing. It's another thing. What you may not be interested in that, but that capability is there, just in case you didn't know. But I get it. So I'm going to give that some thought. I will. And then let's see here. The only other thing with that, okay. So I think I mentioned this several months ago, thinking about like an audio version when I first kicked this off. And I said, basically, I have episodes of Q&A going back to 2013. So obviously I'm episode 295 today, and it was only like 283, I think it was, 284 when I picked things back up. So do I go back and upload all the old ones? Because there will be some old ones. I don't even know how relevant all that information is going to be, or you know, all that stuff's still on YouTube, but do I do it in the audio podcast just so there's like a continuous thing? Or do I just start, you know, in the 280s where I picked things back up? I don't know. I'd love y'all's feedback on that. I'll give it some serious thought. All right. And then I got another comment here from RSH8057 says, this man knows about sprinkling powder, but has never done a deep dive on why architect nibs are named thus. Unbelievable. Is it unbelievable? I mean, I don't know everything, y'all. And I don't pretend to know everything. But I do research things. I research the sprinkling powder. Honestly, you know, it's like obviously a little snarky there. That's fine. You know, one thing about this is like, it really kind of caught me off guard how much interest there was in architect nibs. I've talked about them periodically over the years, but it seems like there's some renewed kind of refreshed interest in it. So I don't know. That's kind of cool. There were a lot of comments about architect nibs, and there's even a question this week that I'm talking about. You know, it's just, honestly, this is the origin of the architect nib. I think last week when I was talking about it, I talked about like it's because of, you know, architects. I was like kind of vague, but I found the origin story of it, and I honestly should have known it. So this is on me. I looked on Richard Binder's website because he's a good authority for a lot of things nibs. And I've even done training with him. I did a 3-day nib course with him several years ago where I'm sure he covered this, and it was just one of those details that I let slip away and maybe just didn't recall in the moment. But on his website, he says that he's the one that came up with the architect nib. Now, he does say like he found, after he came up with his grind, he did find an example of this from like an old Schaefer from the 60s or something, but I don't know that it was called the architect, but whatever. Either way, he definitely popularized the architect nib, I think back in 2004. So it's going back a little ways. But he called it the Architect because the Architect print, like style, like the block print, is kind of known for being in that format, and this type of nib looks really good in that block print format. So he called it the Architect nib. So I should have known that because of the training I've had with him. I'm sure he told me at some point. I just forgot that in the moment. So I apologize about that. But, mystery solved. It's not a deep dive maybe, but at least I'm kind of filling in the gap for what I didn't know last week. And I'll learn from that, and I will try to remember that moving forward. But anyway, appreciate you pointing that out. That's it for feedback right now. Let's talk about some new stuff. All right. Don't have a ton of new stuff. It's been a little slower as we're easing into January here, which has been just fine because we've had plenty going on. But do have a new pen this week. This is the Monteverde Regatta Mondrian Broadway Boogie Woogie. It is a mouthful. Monteverde Regatta Mondrian Broadway Boogie Woogie. Limited edition. So this is a follow-up. The Monteverde's done a regatta with a Mondrian pattern. So this is Piet Mondrian, who's an artist in New York City, known for doing clean lines, carefully segmented blocks, with lots of color in this like abstract style. So it was a much bolder, blockier kind of pen that they did first. It was surprisingly popular. I am not plugged into the art scene, so I have no idea if the interest in it was just because the colors were cool or the pattern was cool, people liked the pen, or they liked the artist. I don't know. So they're doing a follow-up pen, so we're offering the follow-up pen. So if you're interested in it, it's a mix of primary hues like red, yellow, and blue set against this backdrop of black, white, and gray. These are much smaller blocks on this one than there was on the first one, so it's got a different vibe, but you can tell there's some continuity there. It's got a steel nib, extra fine, fine, medium, broad, 1.1, and OmniFlex, and it's $108 for the pen. So go check that out if you're interested. And we have a new notebook that came in. This was literally the only product we launched this last week, which is very weird for us. But anyway, the Lloydstrom 1917 A5 notebook in deep sea. So this is 249 pages, 80-gram ivory paper, dot grid, and it's $25.50. Hardcover notebook. So if you're familiar with Lloydstrom, it's the same notebook as all the other ones. It's just in this cool deep sea color. I really do like this color, though. It's like a nice navy color. And that's it for new stuff at the moment. There's a bunch of stuff coming soon. I hesitate to talk about any of it because I got question marks on all the launch dates for them. So take a look at the new arrivals and the coming soon tabs on our website, and you can see all the cool new stuff. Let's talk about some company updates now. All right, just a few quick company updates. I don't need to go on and on about local things that we have going on that really aren't of much concern for you all, but I know just you like some behind the scenes stuff. So here we go. I mentioned last week that things were crazy, that there was, our water treatment plant was shut down because of a power outage due to some storms that we had, wintry storms. Excuse me. So after I recorded that, I said last week that we had stuff shut down. There was a boil water advisory in the city, but we were outside of the city. Well, the boil water advisory reached us here at Goulet Pens too. So we had 2.5 days where we had to do the boil water advisory thing too. So it was more of a precautionary thing. It's because, a bunch of the system had depressurized basically. So any type of backflow or anything like that, there's a potential for like any cracks in the water pipe systems to like seep in bacteria and stuff like that. So they filter everything at the treatment facility and then they pump it out, and it normally stays pressurized so stuff doesn't get in. But when you drop that pressure, stuff can get in. And then stuff can be flowing that's, not through the filters and stuff like that. So lots of precautions across much of our beloved city here in Richmond and some of the surrounding counties. So that was an interesting few days. It felt kind of like early COVID times because I would go to the store trying to get like bottled water and stuff, shelves cleared. And it was like, oh yeah, this is weird. Like everybody in the city was affected, and you're just like, yeah, okay, we've been through something like this before. Ice all over the roads and stuff like that. So it was a very interesting week for us. All the schools had shut down, daycares, a lot of restaurants, once they didn't have like clean water, restaurants shut down. So it was a weird couple of days that we had there, but everything's back to normal now. Everybody's safe here. We had to like put up signs and not use the water fountains and all this kind of stuff here. But thankfully it was still okay to like wash our hands and stuff like that with the water. But so that was fun and interesting. And then we got more snow Friday night into Saturday morning. So that was also fun, but it was on the weekend. So we got to enjoy that with our families and stuff like that. And then basically everything was good by Monday. So we just started up a normal week and we're like, wow, it's kind of easy to do things when we can like, have power and water and heat and all these things. We can sort of have a normal week. So that was a thing. So we're all back to normal there, but thanks for any concerns there. I'm honestly paying more attention to what's going on in LA. I know a bunch of people in LA, and that place is going through like end times. So it's a little crazy. I won't get into all that, but thinking about those folks a lot. Anybody affected by that out there in the wildfires in California. And then, some other news. I'm not like the most up to date on all this kind of stuff, but the TikTok ban that our beloved government put in place or decreed last year through law is set to go into effect on Sunday. I know the Supreme Court's meeting and all this kind of stuff. There's articles and things way more credible than me. But, we are on TikTok and we do social media content, stuff like that. So we're paying a little bit of attention to it. It seems like it's going to go forward. I don't know. I'm recording this on Tuesday afternoon on January 14th. Anything could happen in the next 5 days. So, you'll know more by the time that you're watching this than I do right now talking about it. So we're paying attention to that. It's unclear if that's going to get overturned or extended or what. I guess we'll all find out together. But, we will see. If TikTok ends up kind of going by the wayside, we will go elsewhere and continue to post good pen content, wherever that may be. And also wanted some feedback. If you haven't seen the video that I did last week, go check it out. This was on Wednesday last week. Maybe I published it on Thursday. I can't remember which day. But either way, non-Q&A video last week. It was just a relaxing style video. Some are saying like it's an ASMR style. It really isn't ASMR. It's just a relaxing, kind of soothing, calm video where I'm doing, playing with an ink and a pen, talking about it, soothing voice, that kind of a thing. I've never really done that format of video intentionally like that before, and I wanted to have fun with it. So I've shot a few of those. Those will be publishing in the next couple of weeks. Just want to try them out and get some feedback. Seems to be pretty good so far, but it's a different style, very different than like a Q&A style, and certainly some of the other like more scripted stuff that I do that literally is not scripted at all. So just kind of running with it. So it's kind of fun. Something different for me to do. Love to know what you all think. So go check that out if you haven't seen it already. And I think we'll actually have another one published this week as well, where I'm going to be drawing a maze for the first time in 25 years, probably. I think it turned out okay. Anyway, let's get into some questions this week, shall we? All right, first one we got here. This is from Karen, 1946. Says, "Hi, Brian. Thank you for sharing info always." You're very welcome. I enjoy doing this. I have a question. Is there any specific reason why fountain pens are so girthy? I tried my first roller point size fountain pen. I don't know exactly what that is, but I'll roll with you on that. And it's so pleasant to write with. I feel like a girthy pen exhausts me in a few lines rather than the thinner one that I felt I could write a book without a problem. So this is an interesting question. Yeah, I think there's an adjustment. I don't know how new you are to fountain pens, but I'm assuming you're relatively newer. Forgive me if that assumption is wrong. There is an adjustment when using fountain pens. Fountain pens do tend to be slightly thicker than most other pens, and there's definitely a correlation between the girthiness of a pen and the length of a pen, and the material that's made and the weight of the pen. Honestly, I think the weight of the pen is more of a factor than it is the girth, because actually I think that the slightly the girthier pen to a point, it's actually easier to write with and less stressful on the hand. Now that may be different for everybody. It's going to be, but like, think about like a therapy pen. If you're learning how to like write and kind of like physical therapy thing, it's usually a bigger, thicker thing because it's easier to hold, less taxing on the hand. Now it may be that if you're used to gripping things a very small diameter and you're having to grip a little harder, and then you go to a bigger diameter and you're still gripping kind of hard, it could be that it's just slightly different positions, slightly different muscles or tendons or whatever that you might be using to grip that pen. Maybe it's just like you're not used to that, so your hand is feeling a little more tired. Or honestly, I feel like, without knowing specifically which pens you're using, I suspect it probably has more to do with the weight of the pen. A heavier pen certainly will, be more effort and a little more taxing on your hand. So a lot depends on that. So these are things to look at and consider. This is why we have tech specs on all of our product pages on our website, is so that you can see the weight, the length, the grip diameter, body diameter, all these things. We show the overall weight of the pen, just the cap, just the body. So depending on how you write with it, capped or uncapped or whatever, you can compare these things so that you can see, if you have a bunch of pens and you've used a bunch and like which ones really feel comfortable for you, you can look up, if it's a pen that we carry on our site, you can look up and see those dimensions. And then you can know, okay, if I get a pen with such and such a diameter, I know that it's going to start to feel uncomfortable. Or if you're like, I know that I have a pen that feels kind of heavy and it's this weight, I'm going to avoid pens that are above that weight. So that's why we have all those tech specs there. It can be helpful. Let's see here. Why are they girthy? Okay, we got a few different reasons, right? And I wanted to pull out a few and show you, because I think it might be helpful to see some pens real time. So let's switch over to that. All right, so I got kind of a big mess of pens here. Forgive me, I'm going to just kind of and superscript out this part, but I'm just going to kind of roll with it. I got a bunch of different types of pens here. Your kind of classic big crystal ballpoint pen. This is definitely like on the thinner side, but pretty much everybody's used these pens before. This to me is like, it hurts my hand because I have bigger hands, and this is just, it's not very comfortable for me because where I want to hold it kind of at a low angle, it's not going to write very well. So I have to hold it more upright. So I'm like more like pinching and all that. So I actually find these types of pens to be more taxing, but of course your writing style may be very different. What I find a little more comfortable is things like these G2, this is like a roller ball pen, right? So typically these are, a little more expensive than ballpoint pens, not necessarily, but on the low end for sure. And this has like a rubber grip on it. It's a little bit thicker. It's a little contoured. So this is definitely more comfortable for me than like this hexagonal, kind of thing. Is it hexagonal? Yeah, hexagonal, bit crystal. So this to me is like, it's an extremely popular format of pen. So I think the G2 is a pretty good like base level pen that a lot of people have used to compare for like size and weight and stuff like that. Now it's all plastic. It's, other than tiny little bits of metal. So it's very, very light. So that is definitely going to be a factor. Moving out of this into pretty much any type of fountain pen, it's rare to have something that's this light, though there are some that are out there. Let's see here. We were talking about girthiness, right? So I think there's a few factors. For one, if you have a pen that's a ballpoint or a roller ball, you have ink that's essentially more concentrated. So it's a very, dark, concentrated, thicker ink. The paste ink that's inside a ballpoint pen is going to be the thickest. And so it's very concentrated. And, the way that these things work is the ball, as you're dragging it across the paper, actually creates friction and sort of melts the paste ink inside of here, and that's what creates the line. So that's why it's not like flowing out of the pen all the time. That's why if you touch it to the paper, it's not going to really leave much of a mark. You have to roll it. It's that friction that does it. But they'll last a decent while for the amount of ink that's in there because it's pretty concentrated. Gel roller balls, if you have ever noticed, if you go from a ballpoint to a gel roller ball, the gel will run out more quickly. And so that's because it's a little more watered down. That's why it flows better. So you get that gel, but even still, fountain pens are even more watered down, that ink, than a gel roller ball, which is part of why they flow even better. And that's where you get that smooth writing experience, right? But here's the thing. So as you're increasing in size, from this little refill, which, is teeny tiny skinny on the ballpoint, you're getting a little thicker here with, essentially more voluminous ink on the gel roller ball. Well, by the time you get to a fountain pen, you need essentially even more room for that water, essentially water formulated fountain pen ink. So there's a lot of different formats of pen because it can look like a lot of different things. But, the most common one is going to be the cartridge converter style. Like I've got this Edison here. And this one I like because I can kind of show you what's going on with the different parts and whatnot. It kind of disassembles easily. But one of the bigger factors, is going to be the ink inside of there. You've got a certain ink capacity. You're going to have like a filling mechanism. There's a nib housing, all this kind of stuff. There's some like basic internals that you kind of have to build everything around. Really the heart of the fountain pen, and let me try and get a converter here so you can see the whole picture. If I remove the grip here, when you're talking about fountain pens, you're essentially, the heart of the fountain pen is this right here. That's basically the whole pen. So you got your feed, your nib, and your ink reservoir. And that's the heart of it. That's really the guts, the inner workings of the pen. Everything else gets built around this. So if you're working with a fountain pen, whatever the mechanics of the ink reservoir, whatever the nib housing, the size of the feed, the size of the nib, the bigger, the wider that is, the wider everything else on the pen is going to be, because you can't have a cap that's thinner, because then the nib will scrape on the sides of the cap, of the walls. So you don't want that. But this is basically what you're building off of. And, a pen like this, like an Edison, this is a pretty standard housing and nib size. You can get different nib. A company that's making pens could make different nib sizes. But this is a pretty baseline, pretty standard one that's out there. So when you talk about that, okay, if the housing is this size, well, the grip kind of slides over the housing, right? So then your grip can be contoured in all kinds of different things, but you're going to have some thickness of material on the grip. And so, your grip is going to be at least that thick. Now, it's not crazy thick. Like, this is not, actually, it's kind of even thinner than the grip on a G2. So it's not that it has to be like super girthy. But this is honestly like one of the thinner ones that you can get for a nib this size. And then, to fit, this is a standard international converter, standard kind of part for, more independent pen maker like Edison. Well, everything else has to build around that. So by the time you have your grip that slides over here, you have threads that have to be put here. And then, whatever the material of the pen, you've got to have internal threads that made up to this one. And then the body of the pen has to be some diameter larger than that, right? So this pen, this is the Premier. This is our exclusive that we designed 1,000 years ago. So, when you see you're kind of like building everything up and around that base there. And then, the cap, well, in order to have a smoother, kind of grip here and not have a big step, we had to do, a cap that was going to be even bigger in diameter than the body, so that the threads here would match up and there wouldn't be a step. And so that's what you have to do. So yeah, by the time you put it all together and you're looking at the cap, yes, then the pen seems a lot girthier. But the goal on this was to have not a super girthy grip. So as you're holding it, it still feels pretty comfortable to what you're typically used to, and comfortable for all different size hands on this particular pen. But yeah, the cap and everything else together is going to be a little bit bigger pen, because you're working around, this base kind of feed filling, mechanism kind of unit that you have to build around. Now, there are different formats of fountain pen. This is one of the thinner ones that you can get that has like an internal mechanism. This is the Pilot Decimo. If you're familiar with the Pilot Vanishing Point or the Decimo, this is the guts of that pen. It's got its own like removable nib unit. It's got its own converter. You can use cartridges, but it's got its own feed and nib. And you can see this nib is really, really skinny as compared to the Edison one, right? So with a skinnier nib overall like this, you can make a skinnier pen. However, this one is a click retractable one, which is kind of unique in the fountain pen world. So, there's a certain amount of just stuff that has to be in here to make that mechanism work. So this is going to be, on the thinner side. And if I compare that to a G2, sorry, I've just got pen parts everywhere here. If you compare that to a G2, it's going to be somewhat comparable in overall size. Honestly, in diameter, especially on the grip diameter, it's not that far off. So you can have good, reliable fountain pens that are really not that different than your typical like G2 style. Vanishing Point is the more popular one. It's slightly bigger in diameter, same internal nib and feed mechanism, stuff like that. But the body itself is a little bit bigger, So yeah, okay. You're getting into something that's like, yeah, it's noticeably a little bit bigger. It can get a lot bigger than that. But then, you have other pens like this is the Diplomat Magnum. This one is thinner. Like, it's got a smaller nib. It's got a step down here on the grip. It's even got a triangular grip. So a pen like this is super light as well, because there's just not a lot of metal in this pen. Whereas something like the Decimo and the Vanishing Point, these are a little heavier. But an Edison, mostly resin, pretty light, not much more than the G2. Diplomat Magnum, really kind of comparable to the G2 because it's very light. This is all plastic here. So this one, you get a grip diameter that's actually even smaller than the Pilot, and the overall weight is similar, I guess. I don't have the exact numbers, but it feels similar in my hand. So it doesn't have to be bigger. It doesn't have to be girthier. However, a lot of fountain pen people like them to be bigger and girthier. Case in point, here's the Pilot Custom Urushi. This is a massive pen. It's got a massive nib. I think the nib on this pen is wider than the grip on the G2. So, you know, you're starting off with a really big nib, and they really designed the nib for this pen. It's this Pilot's number 30 nib, which is about equivalent to a number 8 size in like the Western standard. So it's big. You got a nib this size, you're going to have to be bigger everywhere else. You know, the filling mechanism on this one, this is the Pilot Con 70 converter that's in here. But even still, you can see right here, like it steps up quite a bit from there. So this was made to have a big grip. It was made to be a big pen. And you're like, why in the world would they do that? Well, for folks like me that have big hands, like you see this is a big pen, it's just massive. It, you know, compared to a G2 or something like that, it's a substantially larger pen, especially with the cap and everything. But for me, with my hands, this actually feels pretty appropriate. You know, so there are folks who are into that. It's not an overly heavy pen, but you know, by the time I put the cap on there, it's like, it's huge, but it's also like making more of a statement too, right? So there are pens out there certainly that are bigger. Certain brands will like lean into that, particularly when you're getting into ones with really interesting designs and patterns. You know, we've worked with a number of different manufacturers with different patterns and stuff. And I will say that when you get into ones with really interesting patterns, the bigger you make the pen, the more beautiful and the more interesting, the more depth you get in the pattern because the material can be thicker. So there is an aesthetic element to it as well. And it just looks bigger. It looks more impressive. So if you're not having to sacrifice too much on the weight side of things, then, you know, making a pen a little bit bigger and a little girthier can make it stand out more, make it more beautiful, and actually make it more comfortable for some people to write with. So, you know, I just wanted to show some of these things, talk through some of the aspects of design and why that can impact things. So as a whole, yes, a lot of fountain pens do get a little bit bigger, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean that it's going to be more taxing or heavier on your hand. I think it's just something that you may need to try a few more pens, see what's to your liking, and really pay attention to the weight of the pen. I think that'll be a big factor for you. So there you go. Next question we have from Steam Dome 9162. I always leave with a better appreciation for fountain pens after watching Brian videos. Well, thank you. I'm glad that is the case. Hopefully you're not getting hallucinations and misinformation, but I try to be accurate. Anyway, excuse me. I have a question. Why don't manufacturers make available more fountain pen options for the USA market? I read all the time how people have to go to Japan, for example, to get a certain color or model that is not distributed in the States. It's a great question, very valid, especially if you're living in the online world, which I imagine pretty much all of you are since you're watching this video on YouTube, unless it gets, you know, shared or syndicated on some other platform. But either way, you're watching it online. So there's a few factors here, I think. I put some thought into this, and I got some stuff to say. I know the industry pretty well. And I think there's some very valid reasons for this that I want to explain a little bit. But at the end of the day, you're like, I want what I want when I want it. So, but anyway, let me explain some things, and maybe you'll be like, okay, you'll roll your eyes and be like, well, that kind of stinks. But here we go. Number one, there are certainly pens more available in a domestic market more so than foreign markets. So you use Japan as an example. You got Pilot, Platinum, Sailor, some pretty big iconic brands that have been around for a long time, very established, and they're global brands. But, you know, not everything they're going to make is going to be made for a global market. The tastes and the preferences of people are different across the world. So not every pen is going to be suited for every market. Now, you could argue like, well, give us the option and we'll tell you, you know, but you know, some of these companies like Sailor and Platinum are not massive companies. Pilot's pretty big, but Sailor and Platinum are not massive companies. So while they have, you know, global distribution, they're not like mega corporations like I think you might think that they could be. So they are somewhat constrained in their production capacity, in their distribution capacity, and things like that. So sometimes it's just like from a practical sense, it doesn't make sense for them to offer everything globally because it's a ton of work to do that. They're going to focus more, especially if they're constrained or if they have, you know, a limited amount of a certain material or color or something like that. What makes the most sense is to offer it to their domestic market. Now, the domestic market is going to end up being online, right? Like we are going to see stuff online because if it's available pretty much anywhere, we're probably going to see it online. And we have a very enthusiastic pen community, especially if somebody finds something that's rare or unique or unusual or hard to get, that's going to get shared even more. So we're all going to get FOMO and we're going to be like, I want that too. Everybody's going to want what they can't have. So you're going to disproportionately hear about the stuff that is harder to get in whatever location that you might happen to be. And so there is a little bit of bias there that's going to happen because it's more exciting to share stuff that you don't see every day. So there's some of that. I would say especially if like something's going to be a limited edition, special edition, that kind of thing, most companies are going to stick more to their local region. That happens here in the US too. You know, US brands like Edison, Franklin Christoph, things like that, they're not available outside the US market anywhere near like they are here in the US market. You know, same thing with like ink brands like Noodlers or Organic Studio. You know, they're going to focus more on where they're closest. This is practical. So there's that. There's a lot of other things that you don't want to have to think about probably that do go into the logistics of offering something in a foreign market. Currency conversion rates, import taxes, customs, duties, shipping costs, tariffs, other taxes and stuff like that. Those are all factors that go into the availability of something in a foreign market. And it's really going to depend on the location of where it's going because, I mean, literally any country that you're exporting from, importing to or whatever, they're all going to have different tax rates and conversions, and the currency conversion is going to change daily. So, you know, something is not going to cost the same to ship out, you know, one day versus the next. It all depends. So, you know, it's less predictable. It's a little difficult to do that. And it's difficult to balance out the cost and stuff like that in foreign markets compared to domestic, you know, and you see that a lot too. You see that a lot in Japan. You're like, why do I have to pay such a dollar amount for whatever, you know, Japanese brand in the US when I see it being sold in Japan for much lower? It's because if you're buying as an individual and you're just importing one pen, well, it may be below like a threshold for certain like tariffs and taxes and things like that. And so you're just basically paying for shipping. And you're paying the domestic, you know, kind of rate because we live in a global environment. And it may even be like a gray market seller. They may even not be like an official seller or whatever. You don't really know because it's foreign market. So, you know, there could be all kinds of things that like make that price lower or make it available that we can't get here. But, you know, it's easier to find now than it would have been 20 years ago or 30, certainly 30 years ago. So, you know, we are seeing stuff that seems very readily available, but there's still logistics of getting that to different countries. So like me as a retailer, as an official business, trying to import, say, 100 pens of something coming out of Japan, I'm going to get hit with all kinds of taxes and duties and all kinds of stuff that you as an individual ordering one pen from somewhere overseas, you're not going to have to pay all that stuff. Or maybe you should have to pay some of that, but you have to file all these extra things and maybe you just don't. Or, you know, a lot of countries, like if we're like, you know, we sell internationally too. So like we do run into like the flip side of this. So sometimes if you're like living in the UK or the you know, EU, for example, you might have to pay a 20% VAT on top of something you might be buying from here. And there's different things depending on how much it costs and all this type of stuff that you might get hit with taxes locally. You know, that if you're buying from your retailer in a different country, you know, you may already have a more elevated price. It might be cheaper to like, you know, buy it here and then just pay some of the taxes and stuff like that. It gets complicated, right? So, you know, that's something that the numbers basically just have to work. And sometimes it's hard to get the numbers to work, you know, for a pen company that, you know, would be selling in their local domestic market. By the time they end up exporting it and having a different market, the price could be substantially more because of all these extra costs and fees and stuff like that. The third thing, I kind of touched on this, gray market, right? So kind of building on the above with all the taxes, duties, all that kind of stuff. If the costs are going to be lower in the domestic market, which it almost certainly is going to be than a foreign market, then there can be retailers, you know, legit or not, that get their hands on these pens that can sell them overseas. And, you know, especially if you're selling on a marketplace like an Amazon or eBay or something like that, there's very little like trackability, accountability, liability type things for anybody. It could just literally be a person in their apartment or something like that that's selling some of these pens to a foreign market. And, you know, you just put up a website or put up some presence that makes you seem like a big company, but in fact, you're really not that big. I'm not saying that's everybody, but, that does happen. So, there can definitely be, some of that. And they may even, price things lower so that it doesn't hit certain price thresholds, for duties and stuff like that. There's all kinds of things that they can kind of do to tweak some of that stuff where, that is a factor that can certainly influence price, but also some availability. If there's something domestically that's available in, say, Japan, they only make 200 pens. That's not a lot of pens. But if some retailers get their hands on that and they offer it globally, well then, that's something that then is available in a foreign market that not necessarily was intended by the manufacturer. I mean, and that's just the world we live in today. So, there's some of that, I'm not even saying like anybody selling like that would be gray market or not legitimate, because we also sell internationally and stuff like that. But the challenge with that is like, do you get the service support? Do you get returns? Do you get all those kinds of things? If you have a quality issue or you have returns or something like that, if you're buying from overseas from Japan, say you're buying up some different color Pilot pen, and you're buying it direct from Japan. Well, you can't then go to like Pilot USA and say, oh, I'm having a problem with my nib. Can you look at it? And they're like, we didn't sell you this pen. This didn't come through us. You got to go back to where you bought it from. And you're like, well, I don't know who it was, some random seller on eBay or something like that. And then it's like, that's who you got to reach out to, and try and work it out with them. So, there's all kinds of complications that can happen with that, but, that's what it is. Liability, warranty stuff becomes a little bit more of an issue when you're dealing with some gray market stuff. And then like longer term, bigger picture, if there's a lot of gray market stuff that's happening, with local domestic market retailers selling internationally, that can also, sort of soak up a lot of the demand, for a given brand, to where somebody who might be inclined to import it, directly into your country, if there's most of the demands already being met by overseas sellers, well, then there's less incentive to pick it up domestically, and it becomes sort of this cycle, right, that happens. So that's something that manufacturers have to pay attention to. And honestly, it's something that is a relatively newer thing in the business world with globalization and e-commerce and all that. Not all brands have really figured that out. And so there are some brands where you're like, there's just way more available overseas than there might be domestically wherever you are. And some of that might just be because they haven't quite gotten a handle on the pricing and stuff like that across all the countries in the world. And so it then like offsets various demand and supply and stuff like that. So anyway, we're getting into like macroeconomics here. Let's see here. Not every brand, point number 4, not every brand in every country is necessarily so online shopping forward, right? So here in the US, we tend to kind of lead the way because we love to buy things. And we, are very, we got Silicon Valley and all that kind of stuff. We're leading in a lot of ways in e-commerce, Amazon, Walmart, all that stuff. Some big dogs. Obviously there's other things, Alibaba and all that kind of stuff. Like China's really big with e-commerce. That's a whole different animal. But for us in the US, we have a lot of availability and we have a lot of options for buying online. That's not necessarily the case in a lot of the places where fountain pens are being made. Places like Germany, Japan, Italy, France, even UK. It's not as widely adopted and widely like designed for e-commerce. It's much more like brick and mortar centric, and so the focus and just the intention for the distribution online might be more of an afterthought for some of these brands. I'm speaking very much in generalities, but it's something that they might not be as conscious of it as we are. Because I mean, if you're sitting here watching like an hour-long pen podcast, then you are pretty into these things. Like you're going to be pretty like forward on the fountain pen scene, and not everybody is as like progressive in that way in terms of online and social and stuff like that. So, that's something that, some of these manufacturers may be over 100 years old, multiple generation kind of thing. Companies that old and that long established, they're not going to be like first early adopters to all the new stuff. So, of course, they're going to focus more on their established retailers with domestic markets, and then you're going to see like pictures and stuff that people get these things and then put them online. Then, it's like your awareness of it is greater than the availability and the distribution of it, right? So it's a little bit behind in terms of logistics than it is, just speed of information and speed of sharing due to online stuff. And then last point that I have is we're pretty privileged here in the US, particularly when it comes to selection in the products of what we want to buy. So it's also kind of easy for us to assume that if we want something, we should be able to get it, and ideally quickly and easily and with free shipping. That's not the case everywhere. It's also not truly reality. Everything is a cost, trust me. And so, some of it is like, we're just not going to get everything, or you may have to order from overseas if you really want it that bad. But some of that is just like kind of normal. Like, we have way more access to information and knowledge than logistics can keep up with. COVID showed us that, right? So yeah, some of it is like, we just might not get it, and that's okay. But, these are all different factors, all just kind of points to pontificate on some of my perspective and stuff like that. So I wouldn't get too insulted if something's not available. I mean, what we do as a retailer here, for example, if like say Pilot, they've got the 742 and, all these kind of things that like there might be solid colors that we don't have, or, various things, various soft nibs and stuff that we don't have. Most of the time with that kind of stuff, it's because either they don't feel the demand is there enough to establish it in a foreign market, or they're limited on their capacity and they want to serve the domestic market first. That happens a lot. So, we ask for those kind of things if we know there's demand, if we want to see that stuff. But ultimately, it's up to the manufacturer what they want to do. So helps for us to know knowledge is power, but then also like respectfully asking and respectfully pestering for getting more availability on these things. All right, next question. All right, this one is from Dave Goodridge. It says, if you found yourself the Fountain Pen Czar, would you do away with proprietary ink cartridges and mandate a standard size? What other things would you change? This is a fun question. I hadn't heard it phrased quite like this before, so I thought it would be an interesting exercise. So I have two answers. I have one that's like my more real but less fun answer, which doesn't fully answer your question. And then I set that aside and I'll answer it like you want. So the non-fun answer is I would immediately resign because I would not want to be a Fountain Pen Czar. I don't think there should be a Fountain Pen Czar because part of the beauty of the fountain pens is there's so much that's put into the development of these products that is local to a particular custom or family or tradition or country or whatever. And that just wouldn't happen if there were like mandates from a single source. Like you might have more consistency, but you would have way less innovation and way less culture and character into these things. So I wouldn't actually think that would be good for the fountain pen market, but that's not a fun answer. I think the organic nature and the diversity of fountain pens is part of what makes them so unique and beautiful. However, it makes it more complicated. And, when you're trying to look for cartridges and stuff, it gets pretty confusing. That also gives me a lot to talk about. Okay. So throw that out because that's the boring answer. So say I'm the czar, like it or not, here I am, I'm the czar. So here goes. I got a few things. Nothing crazy, but I'll roll with you. I think the different cartridges and converters does get pretty annoying. So in concept, yes, I would want to standardize something. What do you standardize on? That gets a little tougher. I didn't know how deeply I wanted to think through all that because my brain would hurt. But standard international would probably be the least disruptive. It's the most standard, probably most universal. It's okay as the size. The cartridges are fine. The converters are fine. I don't, just if we're obviously throwing reality a little bit out the window here. So I was thinking like, what would I standardize if it wasn't going to be standard international? I don't know. Platinum would be a contender for me. They've got very solid ink cartridges. They're like almost indestructible. And their converters are pretty solid too. And I like that you can take the converters apart. A lot of companies have moved away from disassemblable converters, which makes sense. But I'm a tinkerer and I like to take them apart. And I like to, when I'm using a converter, I like to be able to take it apart, clean it out thoroughly, put a little silicone grease on the seal, just make it run smoothly. It's a disposable, essentially, item, so it's not that big of a deal. But I don't know, I just like doing that. So let's go with platinum. I'm just not thinking about it too hard, but that's a pretty solid thing to build off of. So sure, everybody's got to use platinum's thing. Another thing, maybe some more consistency across nib sizes. particularly in like the nib quality and tuning, but also like the size of the grinds. So if you're getting a fine, you know pretty much what a fine should be. Again, in reality, I wouldn't actually want to make that happen because I love the different nibs and the different way they do them across different brands. But it would definitely be a lot easier if you were getting a fine, you knew what size that was going to be. So sure, let's make that standard across all nibs. And then like there has to be a standard for a certain quality, certain tuning, certain level of flow, stuff like that. So it would just be really nice if you knew a lot more what you're getting across all brands when it came to nibs. So yeah, let's do that. Let's decree that to happen somehow. I would mandate some schools for nib technicians. I think that nib work is, I'm not going to say it's a lost art. It's an art that's being found, but very, with much effort and without a lot of standardization. It's very much a tinkerer's kind of thing. Most nib people are pretty much having to teach themselves. Maybe some instruction on some level from other people in like an apprentice type relationship, but it's usually not any extensive period of time. And it is a bit of a lost art form, if I can call it that. So it would be really nice for the future of the industry and just for the sake of standardization to have some school where people can go and learn that craft. Why not? Let's see here. What else? I would create a standard for measuring and displaying ink properties. Dry time, water resistance, flow, all that kind of stuff. And while we're at it, let's go with paper smoothness, ink resistance, things like that. There's very loose subjective terms that are not even like said from the manufacturers on ink and paper that we end up sort of having to figure out as users. And even then there's no standardization because we're all just kind of making it up based on what we see and feel and think the word should be used in such a way. But what I think is a wet flow, you may not think is a wet flow at all. So having some kind of standard for that would be really nice. Again, just making it easier so you know kind of what you're getting when you're looking for it. And that's kind of what I got for right now. So essentially just like standardizing things is pretty much everything I would decree. So that's what I have for now. But what would you instill if you were the Fountain Pen Czar? Maybe you'd be like, I think there should be no more steel nibs. Everything should be gold or whatever it might be. No more flex nibs or only flex nibs or whatever. I'm curious to hear. Dream a little bit and let me know what you think would be good if you were in control of it all. Next question we have here is from Guitar Jeff. Brian, a question for you for the Q&A. Hey, look where we are. Good call. So for Christmas, I bought a friend a fountain pen. Good on you. Specifically, a LAMY Safari, complete with a converter and an ink sample pack from Goulet pens. Shameless self-promotion. He used all the cartridges already and has been exploring inks. That's kind of awesome. Sounds like he's like legit using his pens. Great news is he loves the gift. Now he's asking about other fountain pens and upgrades. Sounds like he's fallen down the rabbit hole. You done well. However, the problem we both are having is all of his pens and pencils have a triangle grip, which is also his favorite feature of the LAMY. What are other fountain pens that are upgrades from the LAMY Safari, possibly even with gold nibs, that have the triangle? Well, I'm really glad to hear about all this. I think your friend is on a really good path. So very biased in that way. This is going to be a preference thing, really, because honestly, when it comes to pens, I mean, the LAMY specifically, very controversial pen in terms of its grip. Some people love the triangle grip. Some people hate the triangle grip and want nothing to do with it. So very much going to be a preferential thing. I will say this is a difficult question to answer because there's just not that many pens available in like the higher end range that have a triangular grip. Typically, you'll see these triangular grips more often associated with, I'll call them starter pens. I don't want to say kid pens, but pens that they do market to kids. There's almost always a triangular kind of component to it. It's meant to kind of like assist in how you hold the pen. Some people prefer those triangular grips. And so, yes, there are pens like the Safari that, they are commonly used with, kids and school and stuff like that, and especially in Germany. But a lot of adults can enjoy them too. It gets a little tricky because for one, if you're injection molding a pen, okay, you can do that triangular grip. It's not too difficult. More difficult than like a round grip, really. But when you get into some of the higher end pens, you're working in metal, you're working in like specialty resins and stuff like that. You're more machining than you are injection molding, and making a triangular grip out of those materials is significantly more complicated. So there's a combination of like, maybe there's not as much demand for triangular grips, or maybe the triangular grip is more associated with a starter pen. So when you get into higher end pens, it might not be as desirable, / the cost is a lot higher to manufacture that. But I can't name you a single gold nib pen that's currently made that has a triangular grip. I looked on our website. I knew, I was trying to think of every pen that I could think that had a triangular grip, and I'm going to share all those in a second. But I couldn't think of anything like higher end that has it. Now, I will say, your friend likes the LAMY. This is a kind of ridiculous option, but you can get a LAMY gold nib, like you have on some of the higher end studios and the Dialogue and stuff like that. They will swap onto a Safari, an All-Star, stuff like that. So you can make it a really nice gold nib pen just on your regular LAMY Safari. You're going to be paying multiples more for the nib alone than you would for the pen. And the nibs alone are not as widely available, but it's possible to be done. That might actually be your only option, or maybe your best option to achieve such a thing. And there may be brands that I'm not aware of that we don't carry that have a triangular grip. The only one that I could think of a higher end nature that had a triangular grip was a company that's no longer around anymore, Omos. They made a pen called the 360, which was a distinctly triangular pen. It was very expensive. And now they're even more expensive because they're not made anymore, and there's still some demand for them. You're easily going to pay $800 or $1,000 for that pen. And is it really worth that? In my opinion, probably not, unless you're like really into the collectible nature of it. But it's not like that much nicer of a pen than modern pens that you can get, unless you really want that triangular grip. But that one is a much more distinctly triangular than you would even have on a Safari. So your options are limited, honestly. With your friend being newer to fountain pens, if you have any fountain pens that you can let them try that have more rounded grips, maybe give him a try. Maybe encourage him to try some of those, because his life will be much easier if he's looking for just a conventional kind of rounded grip. That will open up his doors way more than staying within the restriction of a triangular grip. That said, maybe that'll take some time. Maybe he just doesn't want to do that, and he only wants to use triangular grips. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to tell you every option that I can think of, at least that we have available, with a triangular grip, and then you will know. So here we go. Starting with, I looked on our site. I was trying to go from memory, but I didn't want to miss anything, so I went to our site, all fountain pens, filtered it by that, sorted it from highest price to lowest price. It was like 8 pages. I think it's like 900 different pens that we have, and I went through all of them. I scrolled through every single one. We don't have any filtering mechanism for triangularity of a grip. We have grip diameter, but we don't have anything for shape of grip. So I literally had to look through every single pen and think about okay, what does it have? And just my own experience with them, I kind of knew most of them. But here we go. These are the ones that have triangular grips that your friend can explore. Not many of them are going to be higher end than a Safari, but I'm going to give you every option so you have the choice. Let's see here. The LAMY Luxe, the LAMY LX, that is a $56 pen. It's essentially just a nicer version of a Safari. It's made out of metal. It's got some slightly nicer appointments, a nicer case, and stuff like that. I don't know if that's going to be different enough or higher end enough, but it is higher end than a Safari, and it has a grip that your friend is certainly going to love because it's the exact same thing as a Safari. So that one might be worth checking out. Another one, this is from Monteverde. It's the MP1. It's a relatively new pen. It's not as triangular, but it does have a pretty distinctly triangular grip. And that one might be worth looking into. That's a $52 pen. Different vibe than a Safari. But it's a nice pen. The Sailor came out with a pen last year called the Tuzu Adjust. And this one has a more triangular thing too. It's got an adjustable kind kind of triangular grip, which is sort of interesting. Might be fun for your friend to play around with. It's $40. The LAMY All-Star, very similar to the Luxe and the Safari, sort of somewhere in between. That is, around $38. So, that could be a somewhat of an upgrade. I like the All-Star a little bit more than Safari, generally speaking. Just to me feels a little better, and like a lot of the kind of brushed aluminum aspect of it is like, I just love the way that most of the metal colors come out on that pen. But it'll feel very familiar. The TWSBI Eco T. So the TWSBI Eco is a fairly rounded grip. Eco T is slightly triangular, hence the T. I don't know if it's going to be necessarily as distinct as what your friend would like with the Safari, but it does go there. And there's some aspects of that pen that, even though it's not more expensive, really, it's $33. It's got some appointments like a clear body, piston filling, that your friend may view that as a higher end option. So TWSBI Eco T, maybe give that one a shot. There's the LAMY Joy, which is again another just variant kind of the Safari, but it's like the calligraphy looking one with a really long back to it. $28. That one's going to be kind of an even swap for a Safari, but it's longer and I don't know, it might feel fancier. Diplomat Magnum. So I showed this one earlier in this video a minute ago. I wouldn't say it's higher end than a Safari, but I don't know, it looks interesting. It's kind of different. The nib is a little bit softer tue, which is kind of cool. It's a little springy. You can get a little line variation on that one. So maybe you'd like that one. You're looking $28 or so for that. The Kaweco Perkeo. Now this one to me doesn't feel like an upgrade from a Safari, but it's different. And it, will take like a full size converter and stuff, whereas most Kawecos don't. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, so some interesting colors going on with that pen too. So you can check that one out. These ones are probably more what I would consider like in the kid pen sort of vibe. At the Pilot Kakuno, it's a great pen, but it's got like smiley faces on the nib and stuff like that. So, it does have a little more of a lighthearted feel to it. That pen's $14 though, and it's got a triangular grip. Great writing pen though. The Pilot nibs are fantastic. So there's that option. And then Jinhao has the Jinhao Shark. Really silly pen, but I don't know. It writes decent for $4 and has a very triangular grip. So that's it. That's every pen that we have that has a triangular grip. So not a ton of options, definitely not a lot of high-end options, nothing with a gold nib, but that's all I got for you. So maybe you just don't have to search around as much. Or if there's anybody else that there are other options that meet this criteria, even if it's not anything that we carry, throw it in the comments, help this guy out. Help Jeff and his friend out, and let him know. Okay. So, this is from Puto Kuchinta. Would the LAMY 2000 be considered a pseudo-architect nib? It writes much differently compared to my standard nibs from other brands, even compared to a Safari nib. You are correct in that there's, a slight different feel to the LAMY 2000 nib, even apart from the LAMY, not just the Safari, but even like the LAMY 14 karat nibs on the other pens like the Studios and the Emporium and stuff like that. The LAMY 2000 14 karat nib is a totally different animal. I actually made a video on this a couple of years ago about the LAMY 2000 nib. It's got a lot of close-ups and stuff. I explained the nib shape and all that because, for a while there was kind of a narrative going that like LAMY nibs like had a sweet spot and were like, took a lot of getting used to and stuff like that. And while that is sort of true, there was a little bit of kind of debunking because I think it was kind of getting like overhyped that like, oh, it has a sweet spot and you have to get a good one and their quality control's not right and stuff like that. That's not been my experience at all. And I've looked at a lot of these pens. It's just the shape that they have of the 2000 nib is slightly different. It's not as like rounded as a ball as conventional fountain pen nibs are, like your Safari or, pretty much anything else. It's a little more of a, would I call it a pseudo-architect? It's right on that border. It's definitely not as round ball as your typical fountain pen tipping, but it's not as distinct as an architect. Maybe that makes it a pseudo-architect. I don't know. It's like if there was a spectrum of like 100% architect nib, 0% architect nib, perfectly round, I would consider it maybe in like the 20 to 30% towards architect. but that's only for the finer nibs. When you get to like the medium and the broad and like some of the more obscure like double broads and stuff like that, you really don't get that architect aspect. You actually kind of get a little bit more of a stubby aspect to it. So it kind of goes in the other direction. So again, it's a very nuanced answer. So I thought it would be helpful to give a demonstration of it. So I actually have what I think is a good representation of kind of a pseudo-architect-y 2000 nib. And I have a LAMY 2000 that I actually had custom ground from Mark Bacchus years ago, made to be an architect nib because I wanted a good representation of a LAMY 2000 architect. So I have one to show you so I can show you the difference between the pseudo and the true architect. So let's take a look at that. Here we go. I've got some Rhodia 80 gram dot grid paper, pretty standard stuff. It should pretty well represent the writing. I'm gonna really have to play around with the zoom and all that on this, but here we go. So I have 3 different pens here. I have a TWSBI 580. This has a fine nib on it. This is going to be our baseline for just a pretty conventional rounded nib, rounded tipping on the nib. I have 2 different LAMY 2000s. This one here is specifically ground to be an architect grind. It is definitely difficult to show it up close, but I'll try and overlay like a close-up picture or something. But you can see it's got that blade look to it. So it's ground. The tipping is cut off on the sides. It's made to be kind of like a blade so that you get a very thin downstroke and a very thick cross stroke. And then I have just my kind of everyday conventional. This is an extra fine LAMY 2000 because I think it does, even though it's extra fine, you would think like that's going to be really small. It's not going to show it as much. But I think this actually has, of the pens that I have in my collection, this actually has the most pseudo-architect-y kind of look to it. So let's zoom in a tad and let me see if I can get some decent writing shots. So here we go. This is going to be the TWSBI. So this is a, TWSBI 580. Fine. And then I'll do some X's so you can see like downstroke and cross-stroke. Pretty conventional. If anything, maybe because I'm writing a little more pressure on the drag, might actually be even just a little thicker on the downstroke than on the cross-stroke. That's, I'll try and go lighter on the push here. So if I go very light, as I do some figure 8s, you can see it's pretty uniform. My cross-stroke and my downstroke. This is a round ball tipping nib. This is what you're going to get. Looks pretty normal. It's just a pen, Let's go with, I'm going to save the true architect for last. This is my extra fine. So here we go. This is a LAMY 2000 extra fine. Okay. And then X is on this one. You can probably look at it and be like, yep, that looks pretty normal. But if I go, figure 8, I don't know if it's going to show up quite as much. Honestly, any kind of architect, if you're writing in cursive, it's not going to show it off quite as much. But if I go downstroke on this, it's that. And if I go cross stroke, it's a little bit thicker. It's a little bit thicker, right? Let me do some side by sides. So if I go, here, this is like downstroke, right? And then I go cross stroke in the same direction. Does that look thicker to you? A little bit. I don't know. Is this pseudo-architect? I think if I write in block print, so if I go, like LAMY, I don't write in block print a lot, so it's going to look kind of sloppy. LAMY, 2000, and I say I want to go like really blocky. I don't know, like the letter E, F, what else? L. I don't know. Does that look pseudo-architect-y? At times, could you maybe play with it a little bit and try and get it consistent? Sure, but I as a retailer wouldn't advertise it as like it's a pseudo-architect. I think it flirts with that a little bit, but it's not something that if you look at it, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. But it's got a little more distinct character to it than a conventional nib, sure. But let me show you a full-on architect. So this nib, let me get my hands inky for a second here. I don't remember what nib size started with here. So I'm going to pull it out. The LAMY 2000, you look at it here. I believe it started with, I got to wipe this off because I can't even see because the ink is glaring off of it. This is a broad. So it's not a double broad or anything crazy. It's just a broad nib, which is readily available in the LAMY 2000, that was ground down to an architect. So the way that architect grind works is, you've essentially got a round tip. You shave it on the sides, to make it thinner, and then you kind of grind it like this so that it's more of a blade. So I don't know how easily you can see that shape right there, but that gives you this kind of like blade-like thing. It takes some doing. It takes some skill to do it, because if you shave it off too much, then essentially you can really throw it off. So you have to get it so that there's an equal amount on each side of it here, ground perfectly, and then you have to be able to smooth it and all that. It takes some work. I've done some architect nibs myself. I was trained by Richard Binder how to do that. It takes some practice and it takes some doing. So, and it's not necessarily going to be super standard either, but basically the bigger the nib size you start with, the bigger the glob of tipping that you have here, then essentially the more drastic you can make it. Sort of like how you have a stub, it's really wide. Well, you need an architect that it's really tall, and you can only get that from more tipping material being on there. So this is a pretty conventional, I would say, architect. So here we go. I'll write it in cursive first. So this is LAMY 2000, and I need to hold it at a little steeper angle too. Architect. And the writing of this, especially with cursive, it's going to change a lot depending on your hand and paper angle. So if, it takes a little getting used to. I haven't written with this thing in a little bit, to be honest with you. But if I go with the X's here, right? So let's do that. So thin downstroke. Check out the cross stroke. That is distinctly different, right? And I'm trying not to have my hand block it too much, but there we go. Thin and thick, thin and thick, thin and thick. That is much more noticeable. Am I right? Let's go some figure eights. Thin and thick. So you're going to get an effect similar to writing with a stub or an italic nib, but it's going to be reversed. So, a typical stub nib, I'm going to turn the pen sideways. Typical stub nib, you're going to have a thick downstroke and a thinner cross stroke, right? That's what a stub nib looks like. Well, this one, you get a thin downstroke and a thick cross stroke when you hold it the same way. So you get that kind of reverse effect. And it looks most effective with block print. So here we go. I'm just going to do LAMY. I think it has a cooler, more distinct look when it's written in block. So LAMY, block. That's not how you spell block. It's a K. Print, right? There. That's cool. That I think is more the inherent nature of what an architect nib was ground to do. To write in block, print, not cursive. So there you go. So I don't know. You judge. If you're looking at a conventional nib, you're looking at a LAMY 2000 conventional nib. Is it a pseudo-architect? This is a full-on architect nib. Is there more of a distinct difference between the LAMY 2000 nib and the conventional nib, or is there more of a distinct difference between the LAMY 2000 nib and the one that's ground to be an architect? To my eyes, I would say this is a lot closer to a conventional nib than it is to an architect, but I would love to know what you think. So I'm really on the fence, but for the sake of not giving a false impression of what you should expect, I would not call this a pseudo-architect. But if I have 10 minutes to elaborate the nuances of it like I do here, I would say, yeah, it's a little more interesting than what you get with a conventional nib. So does that fall into pseudo category? I don't know. There's no distinction for what that means. So you be the judge, but it is what it is. And now you know. All right, that's it for questions. I'm going to talk a little bit about my adventures, and then I got a fun fact for you. So I don't have too much to share with my adventures this week. Honestly, the vast majority of my week was spent with all of the excitement at home and work with, snowy weather, ice, trying to, help our team out who had water issues, heat issues, power issues, all these kinds of things, and just have as much of a sense of normalcy as possible. Plus, our kids were off school last week, so managing all that. So it was just an abnormal week. So I didn't do any particularly interesting projects or anything. One thing that I'll talk about one thing I didn't end up doing that I was maybe thinking about a little bit, didn't seriously plan it, but a couple of weeks ago, a customer of ours let me know, because I've talked about playing saxophone. They let me know about something called the International Saxophone Symposium. So this is held in Washington, D.C., which is about 2 hours north of where I live. And this is put on by the U.S. Navy Band. So it's like very legit, but it is like the largest international gathering of saxophone, players. And it's like a lot of internationally famous saxophone players. The U.S. Navy Band is there. A lot of like colleges that have, big music programs and have like big saxophone, whatever, go to this thing. I don't know how big it is, but it seems pretty big. There's like 5 or 6 sessions happening at any given time over a solid 2-day period into the night. So I was like, oh my gosh, I'd never heard of this thing. I looked at it and I was like, it's not that far from me. Rachel's family lives in the general area. Rachel was born in the Metro DC area, and her family still lives there. So I was like, okay, I have a place to stay. So I was thinking about it, but honestly, earlier in the week, it was already going to be kind of soon. And it was like a Friday and a Saturday. So I was like, do I just go on Saturday? Do I try to go on Friday? But then all this craziness happened, and I was like, this is not meant to be. Not this year. So I don't know. Maybe I'll look to it next year. If any of you have ever been to it, it'd be amazing to hear what that's like, but I highly doubt that. But anyway, it's kind of neat. So that's a thing. But I don't know, it'd be kind of cool to check out something like that. And the other thing, I've talked a lot about like the various musical instruments and stuff that I've done. Really, the floodgates have opened back up for me in terms of putting music back into my life. So way back in the day, I'm talking like 2000, no, not even 2000, 1998, 99, I guess. I wanted to make music. I was playing, I played contrabass clarinet in my high school band. I was playing some guitar and bass guitar at that time, but, computer, like electronic music was newer on the scene then. And I had, some programs like Cakewalk and stuff like that where I'd like write legit sheet music, but I had other programs where I was like making beats and loops and things like that. It was very, very early days back then doing that, but I always liked doing it and made some music and stuff with my friends. Didn't have any like hardware, and the software honestly was pretty basic. Fast forward a bit, in college there became slightly more that came out, but I was really busy in college. I didn't really do much of it. But I always kind of kept it in the back of my mind. Well, my brother-in-law at least recently was talking about, he did kind of the same thing, in his early years. And he talked about this device that's essentially like a drum machine. The device it's literally called the Machine, like MASCHINE. But you might have seen some of these things. They've got like colorful like buttons all over it. And it's got these pads that you can like tap on. But basically you can do all kinds of crazy stuff with this thing. So anyway, you can make beats and loops and stuff like that. And part of the inspiration for me was, I play bass guitar. It's kind of boring to practice some of that by yourself. So it's nice to have like beats and tracks and stuff that you can like loop to just kind of jam with yourself. So part of it was maybe a little bit that, part of it was maybe I was trying to, scratch an itch from my youth. But anyway, I looked at this device and, I was at Guitar Center this weekend and they had a used one, and it was like 50% off basically from the new price of a new one. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll check this thing out. And And honestly, when I was talking to my son, Joseph, about it, he's pretty interested because he doesn't actively play any instruments, but he loves music. So he was really interested in like, maybe this is something that he could use to make music that's not as like daunting as trying to learn like sheet music and all this kind of stuff, which I get. It's a lot of time invested to learn that stuff. So I was like, cool. It can be like a thing that he and I do together. So I haven't actually gotten the thing fully functional yet. What ended up happening, and this is kind of boring saga, so I'll try to move it on. But basically, because I bought the device used, you have to like, there's software tied to this thing. It's essentially a MIDI controller. If any of you have used any MIDI products to make music and stuff in the past. So there's hardware, but it really needs to be connected through a computer and be used with software. But it's really cool. You can literally like download songs, whole songs. You can run it through the software and it will break apart all the different instrument tracks. And then you can take clips and beats and stuff like that out of those tracks. So if I'm like, I really like the drum track from this Led Zeppelin song, I can load that in there, isolate just the drum track, and then loop like certain portions of it, cut it together and all that. And like real time, like have different beats. It's really cool, the creative stuff that you can do with this thing. But boy, I've bitten off quite a bit. The starter guide for how to use this device is 209 pages long. And the user manual is 640 pages long. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what am I getting into? It's like, I think I know now why I didn't fully get into this, in like my college / like early career days. It's just kind of daunting and overwhelming. But I was like, you know what? My son's young. If he's motivated, he has got more time than me. So I'm going to kind of let him loose on this thing too. And we'll see if we can figure it out together. So I've been working out the licensure and all that kind of stuff because I bought it used, I didn't have like the license key and all this kind of stuff. So I've had to go back and forth with customer support and all that kind of stuff. But I think I finally got it working. I'll update y'all on the saga if it's anything interesting, or I might just kind of like quietly give up and let my brother-in-law take it and, go with that thing. But anyway, it's my latest thing. I'm just a serial hobbyist. What can I say? Y'all can probably relate. But anyway, it's a neat little machine. It's cool. If you look up drum controllers or look up machine, it's kind of wild, but it's really learning a whole new ecosystem. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to get into all this. We'll see. But anyway, those have been my adventures for the last week. We'll see what unfolds next week. So let's see here. I'll go ahead and wrap it up. So thank you for watching. Leave me some feedback. Let me know how I'm doing. Ask me some questions too. I want to keep this going, keep it interesting. So you asking me questions on the YouTube videos is helpful. So I'll pay attention to those. You can check out gouletpens.com for fountain pen, ink, paper, all that kind of stuff. My fun fact for this week. So according to the Guinness World Records, the longest running daily journal was created by Colonel Ernest Loftus of Harare, Zimbabwe. He kept a daily diary for over 91 years. He began his daily diary on May 4th, 1896, at the age of 12, and continued until his death on July 7th, 1987, at age 103 years and 178 days. That is some commitment. I can say from trying to daily journal at various points in my own life, I do not have that kind of commitment or discipline. Props to this guy. So can you imagine 91 years of daily journaling? Whew. That's kind of wild. So anyway, thought that'd be kind of a fun fact for you. It's good spending time with you this week. I plan to be back next week. We'll see what happens. I will say a little bit of a heads up. So our normal video editor is, may have some, I'm not going to get all into it, but may have some personal things that might disrupt our schedule. It's not totally up to us about when that may happen. So there may be some disruption here coming in the next couple of weeks. It's nothing bad or scary or anything like that, but just some life stuff that is not totally certain as to when is going to happen. So hopefully it doesn't disrupt things too badly, but I imagine there will be some disruption at some point with our regular video schedule. I'm sorry if that happens, but now you know at least a little bit of what's going on. I don't want to overshare, somebody who I have not asked how much I can share. So anyway, expect a little bit of disruption maybe, but nothing crazy going on, just life. Anyway, I plan to keep shooting videos for the foreseeable future. So appreciate you spending time with me. Glad you're enjoying these things and, enjoy your week. Thanks for watching and right on.